U.S. Senate candidate Al Franken is on the defensive about some accounting problems that have now led him to be fined in 2 states. John Mason is live in the newsroom now with more on the story. John?
Leah, the state Republican Party continuing to raise questions about Franken's business dealings. First, he was fined for not paying workers' compensation insurance for people who worked for him in New York, and now Franken owes about $5,800 in back taxes in California because he failed to file income tax returns for 5 years for a personal corporation there. Franken says he stopped doing business in California years ago, and his accountant simply failed to file the paperwork to dissolve the corporation. Both DFL and Republican political analysts say this could pose problems for Franken's race against Senator Norm Coleman.
But I think it's interesting that this is coming out now after Cerisi drops out. If some of this comes out before Cerisi drops out, the DFL endorsement might be a different picture.
And I think it's really a disfavor what's happened now to Al Franken and the DFL, because they're going to be stuck with a very flawed candidate.
Republican Party officials said today they have evidence Franken did continue to do business in California after he said he stopped, and you can hear more analysis. The Republican Party of Minnesota will submit corporate tax information about Al Franken to California authorities. Franken owes about $5,800 in back taxes in California because he failed to file income tax returns for 5 years for a personal corporation there. Franken says he stopped doing business in California years ago, and his accountant simply failed to file the paperwork to dissolve the corporation. But the Republican Party says its information proves Franken continued to do business in California after he said he stopped. And we will have analysis of this situation from both sides, from both political parties, coming up Sunday morning at 10 on Edge. More troubles for Senate hopeful Al Franken. The Republican Party of Minnesota says it has evidence that Franken continued to do business in California after he claims he stopped. Franken owes about $5,800 in back taxes in California. Claims he dissolved his business 5 years ago, but his accountant didn't file the paperwork.
A third person.
More tax trouble for Al Franken. His personal corporation has been accused of hiding some of its income from authorities in California. Last week, it was revealed the comedian turned Senate candidate's business owed thousands of dollars in back taxes. A Franken spokesman says he was acting on the advice of an accountant, and they're working to determine what mistakes were made and if more money does need to be paid.
Of course, the other big local campaign news revolves around Democratic U.S. Senate candidate Al Franken. He is under fire right now for not being sure if he paid taxes on earnings in California. Franken is trying to figure out if he owes the money in California or anyplace else. Republican leaders say Franken didn't pay taxes on some of his income for the past 5 years. A spokesperson for the Democrats says this is simply an accounting mistake, or maybe an accounting mistake, and any money owed will be paid. Here to break that all down for us this morning is political analyst Larry Jacobs. Larry, not good when you say you're not sure if you owe taxes in a given state. Either you owe taxes or you don't.
Yeah, and I think it's not a good story. I mean, all of us pay our taxes. Obviously, Al Franken has paid a good bit of his taxes, but he hasn't, apparently, he may not have paid all of his taxes. There are a couple problems here. One is there's a drip, drip, drip quality to this. This is the third or fourth story we've now had on some aspect of Franken's taxes. The second issue is it is now clear that the Coleman campaign appears to know more about Al Franken than Al Franken. And that suggests a much broader problem about the professional campaign staff and apparatus that Franken has got running. After all, #1 rule is you scrub your candidate, you know what the problems are, and you try to get them out before the campaign.
I mean, it's baffling to me that they would not have found this earlier. But let me ask you, I mean, the first problem was a problem with workman's comp back in New York going back a number of years. That's one problem. Then there was a franchise tax issue for California between 2003 and 2007. This one, though, involves income taxes, and to me that feels different. I mean, to me the bar has been raised, and I don't see how, unless he can come up with an explanation this week saying, hey, I did pay them and I filed them, I paid them personally, he can get past this, or do you think there's another way around this?
Well, I think it's a problem. There's no doubt that he doesn't have control over his taxes, and it appears that, well, it's clear that at least several cases he's not paid taxes and he's made the payments. Whether the income tax issue turns out to be a big one or not, I still think the bigger problem is this pattern. And Minnesotans are seeing headline after headline, news story after news story on Al Franken's taxes. It means the story is about Franken and it's really taken Franken off his campaign messenger, which has to be Norm Coleman, the incumbent, and the set of issues that Al Franken's campaign wants to raise. He's on the defensive. That is bad.
How big a deal is this? I mean, the convention is June 6th, the nominating convention for the DFL candidate. I mean, is he going to get past this?
Well, we'll see what happens in the coming week or so. My hunch is that he still gets past it. There has been some, perhaps it's just wild talk in the Democratic circles about continuing concern about whether Al Franken is going to be able to run a professional, high-quality, and competitive campaign against Norm Coleman. Poll came out this week. It showed Franken about 10 points behind Barack Obama.
Before this latest disclosure.
Exactly.
No.
This is not the kind of thing that you want to see if you're Al Franken or a Democrat.
All right. Well, we'll have to obviously keep up on that, because that's going to be interesting to see if he can put this behind him, because I think it's going to be really hard, really hard.
Well,